Welcome back to HMH at Home. My name is Amy Frake, and I am an educator here at Holocaust Museum Houston. This is a video series from Holocaust Museum Houston, bringing you information and activities on human rights and the Holocaust. As always, you can find previous videos on our website under Education, then Online Resources, and Family Activities. Today we are going to hear from a Houston area Holocaust survivor, but before we do, I want to start by defining the Holocaust. The Holocaust was the murder of about 6 million Jewish people by the Nazis and their collaborators across Europe during World War II. The Nazis were a political party in Germany led by Adolf Hitler that came to power after Germany suffered a series of defeats and an economic collapse. The Nazis took advantage of financial instability and social divisions to take power. They promised the German people that they would improve the economy and create a national community. But in order to do this, they wanted to exclude certain groups of people who were thought to be against the Nazi regime or who were viewed as social outsiders. These groups included Jewish people, members of other political parties, people with mental and physical disabilities, LGBTQ people, Roma and Sinti, and Jehovah's Witnesses. As the Nazis invaded other countries, this list expanded to include even more identities who existed outside of the Nazis' ideal. So discussions of the Holocaust tend to fixate on the number 6 million, approximately the number of Jewish people who were murdered. But at the museum, we try to think about this not as 6 million, but as 1 plus 1 plus 1, 6 million times. Because each of the people who were murdered had their own individual life experiences, hopes, dreams, and complexity. But behind me is the survivor wall at Holocaust Museum Houston, which lists names of local Houston survivors who are part of our community. Today, we are going to hear from one of those survivors. Her name is right over here. Dr. Anna Steinberger lives here in Houston and is very active as a volunteer at the museum, and she was kind enough to share her story with us.
Good to see you, Amy. Thank you for inviting me to share my story. I do this quite often, not necessarily via Zoom. I like to meet with high school students or public school students and share my story to impress upon them that hatred and prejudice can only lead to disasters like the Holocaust, and that we all as people must learn to live in peace with mutual respect towards one another, regardless of our appearance or our backgrounds or how we worship God. This is really my basic message. Now that we are so isolated, it just emphasizes that life is always full of surprises. We never know really what tomorrow brings. And the Holocaust was also a big surprise to me and my parents. So let me share with you a little bit my story, how it all happened. I was 11 years old in 1939 when Germany invaded Poland, starting World War II. I was supposed to go to school September 1, starting 7th grade after I finished 6th grade the year before. Couldn't wait to go back to school and see my classmates. I had new clothes, I had new books, but instead, all I could hear was a roar of airplanes, bombs were falling. I lived in Poland, city called Radom, which is a middle-sized city south of Warsaw. And my parents, my father was a tailor, my mom was a homemaker. So I asked my mom, what is going on? Am I not going to school today? And she says, no, honey, you're not. We are in great danger. Our house may be bombed. Many people were being killed. You and your brother just go hide in the cellar. So we spent days in the dark cellar, just hoping and praying that somehow our building, our house will not be bombed. So this went on for a few days until unexpectedly, my uncle, who was a country doctor, came with two horses and a buggy and his wife and their son, and says, there's no time to pack anything, just get dressed real quick and we are leaving. We are leaving? Where are we going? Danger was coming from the west, so we just went the opposite direction. We went east. And for days, we were on the road. Polish roads were not like American expressways now. They were usually dirt roads or just cobblestones. So it was a very slow progress. And thousands of people were trying to escape the German invasion. So the progress was very, very slow. But after a few days, with being on the road, and the worst thing was that as people were trying to save themselves, the German airplanes, the Messerschmitts, would lower themselves as low as the ceiling of my apartment here and machine gun the people that were trying to run away. So every day was a surprise day. My father was actually injured in his arm, but my uncle, always traveling with a doctor's bag, was able to stop the bleeding and saved his arm, and thank God for that. The German army was advancing through Polish territory very rapidly, so we knew that sooner or later we'll end up under the German regime, and things were not looking very optimistic. Being Jewish, we already knew that the Germans were not very kind to a Jewish population. But as by a miracle, and I believe in miracles to today's day, uh, one morning my father said, I hear Russians spoken here. What in the world are the Russians doing here? Well, as it turned out, the Russian Stalin and Hitler made an agreement to divide Poland, and luckily we ended up under the Russian regime. So under the Russian regime, you had no say-so. If they told you to turn left, you had to turn left. If they said turn right, you turn right. So about 2 days, 3 days later, they told us to show up at a railroad station, and they were moving us further east. Well, we just followed the orders, and by cattle trains, they were moving us east. When we asked, where are we going? How long are we going to be on this cattle train? Don't ask questions, just obey orders. Once a day, that train would stop in the middle of nowhere, and people were told to get off the train just to relieve themselves, take care of their biological needs. And to this day, I still have vision of people running back on the train when the whistle blew with their pants down because they didn't want to be left in the middle of nowhere. And during that stop, they also gave us a little hot water called kipyatok in Russian. And that was about the only thing we got once a day, and a little piece of bread. Life was terrible. It really was just barely surviving. And after being on this trip for, I think, about 10 days or so, I didn't keep a diary, so I'm not sure. We eventually ended up on a collective farm. I was able to learn Russian. After about a year, they moved us to Stalingrad. And now, knowing the language already, and living in a large city of Stalingrad, you may have heard the Battle of Stalingrad was a turning point in the Second World War. So I was able to go back to school and catch up with my own age group. So now we lived in a one-room apartment with a bathroom down the hall, but that was beating running to the outhouse on the collective farm when it was snowing or raining or whatever. So life was pretty good until Germany invaded what used to be called the Soviet Union. They invaded June 22nd, 1941. And within a relatively short time, the German army was under Stalingrad, and there was a very bloody battle with many Russian soldiers being killed. And so orders came again, just whatever you can wear and carry with you. Come to the railroad station, we are moving you. This time we guessed we probably are being moved further east. We did, and for about 2 weeks in cattle trains again. By now we were very experienced passengers, experienced travelers with the same routine. We ended up in Kazakhstan, all the way west, very far east, in a place called Alma-Ata, which in translation meant father of apples. They had many, many kinds of apples in Alma-Ata. Is when we left Stalingrad, my brother, who was 5 years older than I, was drafted to the Russian army. And we have not had any communication with him. And not until end of 1946 did we learn that he did survive the war. He was in the Russian army, then in the Polish division. He was in the division that actually liberated Warsaw from the Germans, and was now back in Warsaw, living there. And the International Red Cross was willing to keep us now somewhat connected with my brother. I thought my parents were going to have a heart attack when they found out that Jacob, my brother, is still alive, because we just had no idea what was happening. So I was going to school. I finished the Russian school. It was only 10 years. They call it Desyatiliyetka. And I started medical school. And the only good thing about Alma-Ata was that I met a young man when I was about 16 and a half that eventually became my husband. We used to go ice skating, we used to go to the theater. The only bad thing was that I was always hungry. If I told you I was hungry, not for a day, not for a week, not for a month, but for about 6 years, I was always hungry because there was never enough food. Parents worked in a clothing factory, and at the end of the day, when they came home about 6 o'clock in the evening, 7 o'clock in the evening, they brought me a little bit of soup that they got in the place where they were working. They used to get kind of a free dinner. I will forever be grateful, because had I ended up under the German regime, being Jewish, my fate probably would have been as the 6 million Jewish people, innocent men, women, and children that were murdered by the Nazis. So in 46, we were finally, for the first time, asked a question by the Russians. Do you want to stay in Russia as a Russian citizens, or do you want to go back to your hometown? Well, obviously, we wanted to go back to the hometown. And this time, by passenger trains for days, we were traveling back, this time going west, coming back to Poland, and only to find out that most of our relatives were killed in concentration camps or died of starvation, being overworked and whatnot. But we were able to meet with my brother, who was living in Warsaw now. He married a Polish girl, and they were expecting their first child. But we did not want to live in Poland. My mom used to say that she felt like we were living on a big cemetery. So we tried to get out of Poland. And mom also found out that one of her three sisters has survived the war and is now living in New York, in the United States. So obviously, our goal was to come to the United States. But that was not easy. How do you get to the United States after the war? So illegally, we actually crossed the Austrian border, Czechoslovakian border, Austrian border, and ended up in the American occupied zone of Germany. And the parents lived in a DP camp. You may have heard of displaced persons camp. While I and my boyfriend, who became my future husband, the one that I met in Alma Ata, we went to Frankfurt am Main to continue our medical studies. And when I was talking to my German professors, whether they knew what was going on, that Jewish people were being gassed and buried in mass graves or reduced to ashes. Oh no, they kind of they said, well, we knew there were labor camps. After all, we were fighting a war. We needed support for the army, so we had to have a lot of people in labor camps to do labor work for the army. They either were plain lying or were in some kind of a delusion, because I'm sure they must have known that innocent people were just murdered in those concentration camps. They were not just working, they were murdered. And when I eventually was able to immigrate with my parents to the United States, and when people ask me, Anna, are you a Holocaust survivor? I would say, no, I survived in Soviet Union, in Russia, because I thought that the people that were in concentration camp were the real Holocaust survivors. But later I was told that people survived being living on Christian papers, being saved by good Polish people, by good Christian people who felt that they were doing their duty, human duty, to just save another life. So, and those that also survived in the Soviet Union, we are all considered Holocaust survivors. So now I am considered a Holocaust survivor, but you know my story.
Thank you so much to Dr. Anna Steinberger for taking the time to share your story with us. Based on Anna's story, do you see how an event like the Holocaust led to people being concerned about human rights? Millions of people were denied basic human rights during the Holocaust, but before it happened, many people claimed there shouldn't be universal human rights because it should be up to the individual countries to protect the rights of their citizens. But with cases like in Nazi Germany, where individual governments could change the rules to make horrible things that they did legal, it became clear that leaving decisions about human rights up to each country didn't provide many guarantees. The Holocaust helped to inspire people to stand up when they see hatred, apathy, and injustice. And after the Holocaust, humanity started to realize that people should have the same basic human rights no matter where they lived. So if you look back at the moon colony that you made in some of our earlier videos, are there any additional rights that you think your moon citizens will need to ensure that everyone has the equal opportunity to thrive on the moon? For your activity this week, we want you to show us how you are being an upstander. And if you aren't familiar with the term, an upstander is someone who stands up for others. The easiest way to be an upstander during the COVID-19 pandemic is just by wearing your mask to protect yourself and your community. So share your best mask selfies with us using the hashtag HMH at home to show how you're doing your part to stand up to the COVID-19 pandemic. And if you need some information, check out our mask selfies from HMH staff at the end of this video. So until next time, we hope you guys will join us next week.